Magazine voted him one of the most heroic animals ever, Moko the dolphin. He didn't just save lives, he came to play with us and he captured our hearts. Tonight, thanks to unseen footage from a TV3 documentary, we can tell you about Moko's heroism, his love of life and his mysterious death.
It's a very special documentary made for TV3's Inside New Zealand. A story of the extraordinary relationship between a wild dolphin and a Whakatane woman.
Sometimes I would know if he was not happy. Other times the look into his eyes, he showed just so many different things. He caught 3 kahawai during the night, brought them back and showed me that he caught his dinner.
They definitely did have a connection that was quite unique to the other people around. It might have been from the amount of time she spent in the water with him, but it seemed to happen from pretty early on. Hello. Hello.
Filmmaker Amy Taylor saw the relationship between Kirsty Carrington and Moko almost from the very first, when Moko arrived in Whakatane in January 2010.
When he moved to Whakatane, I just decided I've got to go and meet this dolphin. So I came over and swam with him. And I just saw what was going on and I thought I've got to make a documentary about him.
The juvenile dolphin first appeared at Mahia off the east coast of the North Island on Easter Monday 2007. For 2 summers he frolicked in the waters there with anyone who cared to play with him, his antics creating headlines all over the country. But in 2008 he did something that caught the imagination of people over the world. Dolphin had ever been seen to do before. Something that Time magazine described as one of the 10 most heroic animal acts ever.
I went down and gave him a bit of a pat, which probably wasn't very professional, but that was just the way we felt.
Dock officer Malcolm Smith will never forget the day he tried to rescue 2 pygmy sperm whales that were stranded on the beach at Mahia. Just when it seemed their efforts were hopeless, something extraordinary happened.
I looked around behind me and there was a lady had actually shouted out, "Here comes Moko." And we looked out to sea, straight out to sea, and he was making a beeline directly for the whales.
As Moko neared the stranded whales, he appeared to be communicating with them.
And they went out to sea.
He led them out to sea, he rescued them.
He rescued them. That's the only thing I can say, and I mean I've been observing natural events and birds and animals for many, many years, and that was just so remarkable to see.
This must have blown you away.
It did. It was, yeah, quite miraculous.
Marine biology student Amy Taylor had heard the stories of that rescue and decided that filming Moko might be a good university project. What she didn't count on was
a few minutes later he came back with a baby hammerhead shark that he'd caught. He actually came and gave me the hammerhead shark to play catch with.
Oh, really?
So I got it, had a look at it, and then I threw it, because you could tell it was like a dog with a stick. And so I threw the shark, and then he got it and brought it back. So straight away I knew he was pretty unusual.
They're full of mercury, the dolphins.
Amy spent 5 months chronicling his time at Whakatane. And almost from the first, she found local woman Kirsty Carrington's relationship with the dolphin was to be as important a part of her film as Moko himself.
It's quite an unexplainable feeling that I had when I saw him. It was just a want to get in the water and be with him, really, and that's what I did.
When Moko arrived in her life, Kirsty put aside her plans to use her teaching qualification and devoted herself to caring for the mammal.
I just love you. I just love you.
I believe that he knew who I was, that every time I went in the water with him, we shared like a friendship.
Such was Kirsty's attachment to Moko that she even spent a night with him.
Hello, darling.
Cradling his body in her arms as he slept.
It was probably the best night I've ever had. I call it my sleepover, and I leaned over into the water and he just slept and rested in my arms, and it's almost like listening to a baby snore. Instead you could hear him just breathing through his blowhole, and Yeah, it's a feeling and an emotion that nobody else could understand unless they were there and were a part of it.
When you looked in his eyes, what did you see?
Honestly, when I looked in his eyes, I saw somebody that was lonely.
Kirsty became the most prominent local face of a group of people who were fascinated by Moko. People who called themselves Moko's Minders.
Moko's Minders are really doing a phenomenal job, controlling crowds but also educating them.
What happens is he just gets a bit fixated.
But there were others who hated Kirsty's involvement with Moko, particularly the Department of Conservation, who are tasked with keeping humans and marine mammals apart.
Some of these people who get in the water with him constantly, they actually think they're the solution to Moko's issues, but they actually become part of the problem.
But as the documentary shows, Doc was helpless when it was Moko who was making all the running for attention.
He craved that attention, I believe, because he was in the waters. You know, he was a wild mammal, but at the end of the day, he was by himself. And for me, I believed he kept coming to look for people to be with.
Over the months she spent filming, Amy spent almost as much time with Kirsty as she did with Moko, and witnessed her transformation.
She did go from someone who hadn't had experience with dolphins to basically being, I think, really quite in love with this dolphin. And I did too, to be honest. You know, you couldn't help it. I looked back on some of my footage and I could just see like this intense look from her, you know, and I know some people think she was obsessed, but it is like just this feeling she had for him.
Was she obsessed?
I think obsession is a really strong word, you know, it's just, yeah.
You don't think you were obsessed by him?
No, not at all. It wasn't an obsession. It for me, it was a love and an appreciation for what I believed he was brought here for us for a purpose.
And there were those like Fisheries Officer Martin Williams who wondered if Moko might be the one who was obsessed.
See, I actually thought Moko the dolphin's a bit neurotic because all the behaviours it had were ones you'd associate with like autistic behaviour. It would like to go in circles. If you had an anchor, it would sit there and just watch the anchor going up down.
A little bit more.
As time went on, the adolescent Moko began to exhibit behaviours that in the wild would be more natural between dolphins than between dolphins and humans. Behaviours captured on film by marine mammal expert Ingrid Visser.
I just filmed him masturbating in the sand and he was gazing longingly into the eyes of one of the young girls here and, yes, humping the sand. They'll masturbate against anything that's moving and half of the stuff that doesn't move as well. Good looking guy, baby.
Honey,
yeah.
check out these.
Despite his enjoyment at being the centre of attention, Moko was often a reluctant film star. Amy Taylor soon discovered that he had an aversion to her camera.
He had a bit of an issue with being filmed at times. At first I was quite standoffish with the whole thing. I didn't interact with him myself. I started just filming people playing with him. But as time went on, I couldn't kind of resist it, and I ended up putting my camera down and I'd play around with him, diving down to the bottom and picking up shells and things like that, and he loved it. He got really into that. So basically, once he figured that out, he didn't like me picking up my camera anymore. So there was even an instance where he would actually knock it out of my hand and push me away from the camera, make sure the camera was like up onto the sand and then push me the other direction.
Still, despite the occasional diva turn from her marine star, Amy believed she was in for years of filming. Bottlenose dolphins can live for 45 years in the wild, and Moko was thought to be only 5 or 6. And Kirsty's role as Moko's protector was turning into a full-blown, on-screen drama, as she seemed prepared to confront anyone or anything that threatened her beloved dolphin.
checking the net just because of Moko plays in this area.
Oh, it's not really my fault if he gets caught in the net.
Well, no, it's not your fault.
So I make a living. So what happens if he gets caught on my net? He's going to drag my net up.
Yeah, I will. I'll be lifting him out with it. My concern is for Moko.
But the history of dolphins who adopt humans is not a generally happy one, as showed with Moko's predecessor, Opo, who captured the nation's hearts in the 1950s, playing in the waters of Opononi until being found dead in mysterious circumstances. And Moko was not making it easy for his would-be protectors. Last year, he abandoned his Whakatane fans.
All stations, I've had multiple requests for the location of Moko the Dolphin.
And eventually turned up in Tauranga, a working commercial port with constantly busy sea lanes.
Everything around him was an absolute death threat for him.
And Kirsty's fears were soon realised. Almost as soon as he arrived in Tauranga, Moko vanished. 2 weeks later, a rotting carcass was spotted, washed up on the shores of Matakana Island. To Kirsty, it was almost like losing a child.
He was history in the making, and to be honest, we did nothing that, for me, we did nothing to protect him any more than what we were doing here.
An autopsy on a body so decomposed could reveal little, only that there were no major injuries. For those involved in the documentary and Moko's short life, there are no answers, only sadness and suspicion.
I kind of do suspect that maybe someone did intentionally harm him. And I think it's easy enough to do that because dolphins only breathe out of a blowhole that's, quite a small area. And if he was in shallow water, it would have been possible to do.
You really believe someone killed him?
So, I wouldn't say I really believe it, but I definitely suspect it.
The doc's Malcolm Smith, who witnessed Moko's miraculous rescue of the 2 whales at Mahia, has his own theory. To what extent were we as humans responsible for Moko's death, do you think?
Well, I think we had quite a large part to play in it, in that we responded to Moko when he started interrelating with humans.
He craved human company, didn't he?
He appeared to, yes, and it's probably not so bad here at Mahia where it's reasonably clean water, but when he was at Gisborne and when he was at Whakatane, he's spent a lot of time in the rivers there, which are not the cleanest places, and that may have contributed to his ultimate death.
Moko was buried on the island where his body was found. But the theories on how he died will probably never be laid to rest. Malcolm thinks it's possible that Moko could have picked up an infection, or even eaten something toxic, as he devoted himself to the places where humans gathered. He should, Malcolm believes, have really been left alone. But he also accepts the special bond we seem to feel with dolphins made that an almost impossible outcome.
He was so in your face, you just couldn't ignore him. So I guess that's sort of probably not the practical answer, but in a way we just loved him to death. We really did.
Coming up.
What did they say? He's really scared of us.
The real translation is